Tonight, we are drifting slowly into the complete lore of Sanguinius and the Blood Angels, the most beautiful, the most cursed, and perhaps the most beloved of all the Space Marine legions the Emperor of Mankind ever raised from the dust and fire of a broken galaxy. This is the story of a being so close to perfection that the universe itself could not bear to let him endure. It is the story of sons born to carry a wound they did not choose, fighting a war that will never truly end, haunted by the final moments of a father they never stopped mourning. It is the story of gold and crimson, of Baal's twin moons burning red in a poisoned sky, of a throne room where history cracked in two, and of an echo that has never fallen silent in the 10,000 years since. If you leave before the end, you will miss the moment the angel fell. More importantly, you will miss what his sons chose to do with the grief. Stay with it. It earns its ending. Before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if you enjoy this kind of slow, immersive storytelling. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Let's begin. Baal is not a world that invites the living. It hangs in the void, with the quiet patience of something that has already survived the worst the universe could offer, and emerged not healed, but enduring. Its atmosphere is dry and faintly metallic, carrying the residue of an ancient catastrophe, a civilizational collapse from the dark age of technology that salted the planet's biosphere with radiation and left behind a silence where cities had once stood. The soil is pale and cracked, the color of old bone beneath a sun that feels slightly too distant to warm properly. Even in the middle hours of the day, when the light is at its fullest, there is a quality to Baal's sky that makes it feel like late afternoon, like the end of something, though what exactly has always ended here is difficult to say. The twin moons arc overhead each night. Baal Primus and Baal Secundus, their surfaces cratered and scarred, reflecting light the color of dried blood onto the wastes below. The old tribes learned to read those moons. They used their positions as a calendar, a weather system, a spiritual map. They told stories about them, myths and fragments of myth passed from speaker to listener across generations of campfire and cave, each retelling softening one detail and sharpening another, so that by the time the myths reached the people who would eventually matter to this story, they had taken on the quality of something almost sacred. Stories of angels, winged figures, golden and enormous, who had come from the sky long ago and left behind a promise that no one could quite articulate, but everyone could feel. Humanity clings to Baal and its moons in scattered tribes. These are not civilizations in any formal sense. They are survivors, small bands of people who have adapted over uncountable generations to conditions that should have made their kind extinct. They wear breathing masks when the wind shifts from the direction of the old ruin fields. They trade for filtered water with the same gravity that other peoples on less damaged worlds trade for gold. They bury their dead in cairns of pale stone and teach their children, before they teach them anything else, how to endure, not how to thrive, not how to build something permanent, simply how to still be alive when the season turns. The radiation has shaped them over generations. Most mutations are minor, a slight discoloration, an asymmetry, a quality of the eyes. Some are not. Infants born with severe deformities are given to the desert, in a ritual that is neither celebrated nor mourned, but simply accepted, because Baal does not permit the luxury of prioritizing the individual over the survival of the group. And yet, these are not cruel people. Their oral traditions are extraordinarily rich. Their martial culture is proud and precise. Their artists, working with the most basic materials, stone dust and pigment and firelight, produce work of genuine complexity. They are survivors, and what survives in them, alongside the practical knowledge of how to stay alive, is beauty, a commitment to it, an insistence on it, even here, even in this, especially here, especially in this. It was into this world, onto these cracked salt flats, beneath these blood-colored moons, that one of the Emperor's gene-crafted sons descended during the great dispersal of the Primarch project. Hurled across the galaxy by forces that even the Emperor could not fully predict or prevent, each of those infant demigods fell towards some world that would shape them in ways their creator had never anticipated. Some fell toward ice and hardship, some toward luxury and political complexity. Sanguinius fell toward Baal, and Baal left its marks on him the way it left its marks on everything it touched, not by breaking him, but by making him understand, at a level below language, what endurance actually costs. He came down in a capsule that scorched the desert for 100 meters in every direction. The heat of re-entry had fused the sand into glass. When the tribes cautiously approached through the settling dust, moving carefully in the way of people who have learned not to rush toward unfamiliar things, they found not a weapon and not a monster. They found a child with wings. The tribe called the Blood took him in. They were one of Baal's more established groups, experienced raiders, careful managers of the few resources the planet offered, governed by a council of elders who balanced tradition against the constant pressure of necessity. They had seen unusual things before, living on Baal. Mutations were ordinary. Strangeness was a background condition of life. But the winged child was something else entirely, and they knew it immediately, in the particular way that people who have lived close to death for many generations know when they are in the presence of something significant. They were not afraid of him. That was the thing they would later try to explain to outsiders and never quite manage: the absence of fear. From the first moment, there was simply the opposite of fear. He grew quickly. His development followed the pattern of the Primarchs: accelerated, compressed. A lifetime of ordinary growth passing in what seemed like seasons. By the time he was a young adolescent, in the years that an unmodified human boy might have spent learning to throw a spear, Sanguinius had already mastered every weapon the tribe possessed, spoken at length with every elder they had, and developed opinions about the management of their water reserves that were, quietly, correct. He was not arrogant about this. He was careful. He watched the way that knowledge was received before he offered it, and he offered it in the form of questions rather than statements, because he had noticed that people were more willing to reach a conclusion themselves than to accept one that arrived from outside. This was not calculation. He was not a child strategist plotting influence. It was simply how he was, how he saw the world. He noticed people. He noticed the individual inside the group, the specific person behind the role. He remembered names and attached them correctly to faces and to the small details of a life. This one's bad knee, that one's preference for working in the morning, this elder's grief over a son lost to the wastes 2 seasons ago. He remembered all of it and acted on it in small, quiet ways that the recipients rarely attributed to him, because kindness that announces itself was not what he was after. The wings were a subject of quiet discussion in the tribe. They were not, biologically, something that could be explained by anything in Baal's mutation history. They were feathered and enormous and white as clean bone, and when he extended them fully, which he rarely did in the early years, they cast a shadow large enough to shelter a dozen people from the noon heat. The elders eventually stopped trying to explain them and simply accepted them the way they accepted everything else about him, as a fact of the world that deserved respect rather than interrogation. The visions came early. He mentioned them carefully to the eldest of the council, a woman named Lyris, who had the patient quality of someone who had been listening to extraordinary things for a very long time. He described the fragments, events not yet happened, rendered in images that were vivid enough to confuse momentarily with memory. Lyris listened and said nothing for a long time, and then told him that the desert also saw things that had not happened yet in the heat shimmer above the flats, and that perhaps his gift was only a more precise version of something the land itself had always possessed. He thought about this for a long time. He was not sure it was an adequate explanation, but he appreciated that she had tried to give him a context that made him feel less alone in it. He unified the tribes of Baal over the years that followed, and the way he did it became a study in the specific qualities that would define him for the rest of his life. He did not conquer first and negotiate afterward. He came to each tribe's leadership alone or nearly alone, without the implied threat of force, and he sat with them and he listened to what they actually needed rather than what they said they wanted in the opening minutes of a negotiation. He found the real problems, the water routes, the old territorial agreements that no longer served the populations they had been designed to protect, the feuds that everyone was tired of but that no one could figure out how to end without losing face. And he offered solutions that made each party feel they had gained something real. Violence happened only when everything else had closed, and even then he conducted it with a deliberateness that made it clear it was the last available option rather than the preferred one. By the time the Emperor's ships broke through Baal's upper atmosphere, the planet was already unified beneath a single leadership. The Emperor descended with the weight of something inevitable and looked at his son, this towering winged figure standing in the desert beneath 2 red moons, and said almost nothing because very little needed to be said. The recognition between them was immediate and mutual, and loaded with a complexity that neither of them would fully unpack for years. Sanguinius knelt. He had seen this moment in his visions many times. He had prepared for it carefully. What he had not prepared for was how final it would feel, not as an ending, but as the beginning of a long journey toward one. The Blood Angels' Legion coalesced around Sanguinius in the years of the Great Crusade, and it became, by general acknowledgement, that extended well beyond the partiality of its own members, the most magnificent fighting force humanity had ever assembled. This was a statement made by observers who had seen other legions in action, who had watched the methodical genius of the Ultramarines, the ferocious efficiency of the Space Wolves, the relentless advance of the Imperial Fists, and who still returned to the word magnificent when they tried to find the single most accurate description of the Blood Angels at war. They fought with an artistry that other legions could acknowledge but rarely replicate. Their assaults had a quality of orchestrated inevitability, each warrior seeming to know instinctively where his brothers would be, how the engagement would flow, where the decisive moment would appear before it arrived. This was partly the product of Sanguinius's influence on the gene seed, which carried within it a faint sensitivity to the psychic currents of combat that went slightly beyond what the physical senses could account for. And it was partly something simpler and harder to quantify. The fact that they believed in what they were doing, not as an abstract obligation, but because Sanguinius himself believed in it, in a way that was visible to anyone who stood near him. Conviction, when it is genuine and deeply held and expressed not through declarations but through behavior, is contagious. Off the battlefield, the Blood Angels built. Their flagship, the Red Tear, became across the decades of the Crusade. a travelling monument to everything their Primarch valued, to art and philosophy, and to the disciplined cultivation of beauty as a practice indistinguishable in its seriousness from the practice of warfare. Sanguinius painted, he sculpted, he composed music in the quiet hours of the ship's artificial night, and the work he produced was extraordinary, not the earnest effort of a warrior who had taken up a secondary hobby, but the work of someone for whom beauty was as serious an obligation as any campaign. He had worked out something that he expressed in different ways to different people across the years of the Crusade, that without beauty, without the conscious cultivation of those things that make life worth preserving, the Great Crusade was merely conquest, wearing more elaborate justifications. He refused to participate in mere conquest. He needed to believe that what he was building was real. He loved his brothers among the Primarchs with a completeness that many of them found disarming. He embraced Robert Guilliman with genuine warmth and held long arguments with him about the nature of governance. Guilliman's precise institutional mind and Sanguinius's more intuitive understanding of human motivation, producing debates that could last through an entire ship's night and end without resolution, but with both parties thinking more carefully than before. He found in Vulcan a kindred spirit, another Primarch who believed that the people protected by the legions mattered as individuals rather than as strategic resources. He and Fulgrim shared an appreciation for beauty and craft, though the directions their aesthetics took were beginning, even in those years, to diverge in ways that felt minor at the time. His friendship with Horus was the one that mattered most, and the one that would cost him the most. They were not identical. Horus was political in a way that Sanguinius never entirely was, more comfortable with the machinery of authority, more interested in the architecture of power. But they recognized something in each other that was rare among the Primarchs, a genuine commitment to the project, not merely to their own advancement within it. When they stood together on the bridge of a ship or walked the corridors of a compliance operation that had gone well, there was between them the specific warmth of two people who have chosen to trust each other and found that the trust has held. Lorgar came to Sanguinius once and said something that was meant as a compliment, that of all the Primarchs, Sanguinius was the most divine, the most worthy of the devotion that Lorgar needed to direct at something larger than himself. Sanguinius thanked him and changed the subject, because he understood exactly where that kind of thinking led, and he wanted no part of it. He was not interested in being worshipped. He was interested in being useful, which is a different thing entirely. And he understood the difference in the deep and considered way that people understand things they have thought about for a long time, rather than arrived at quickly. The warning signs were already present in those years, in isolated incidents across the Crusade, in the medical records of the sanguinary priests, in the quiet conversations among the Legion's senior officers that did not find their way into official reports, but in the urgency and momentum of a galaxy being reconquered. The warning signs were noted and filed and not fully examined. They should have been. It began, or rather, it first became impossible to continue ignoring, in incidents scattered across the decades. A Blood Angel warrior in the heat of battle would change. Something in the quality of his movement, in the expression visible through a raised visor, or the behavior detectable through a sealed helmet's biometric feeds, would shift. The focused, almost serene precision that defined the Legion's fighting style would crack open, and what came through that crack was older and darker, and entirely without the quality of restraint that Sanguinius had spent his life embodying, and his sons had spent their training years learning to replicate. They called it the Red Thirst. It was a hunger, specific, atavistic, arriving without announcement and departing without explanation. It reached down through the engineered physiology of a space marine, past the black carapace, past the enhanced musculature and the secondary heart, past all the layers of biological modification that separated an Astartes from the ordinary human he had once been, and found something older than all of that. Something that lived in the gene seed itself, woven into the inheritance that every blood angel carried directly from Sanguinius. In the grip of the red thirst, a warrior felt the smell of blood, not as a tactical signal, but as something that bypassed reason entirely and spoke directly to a part of him that preceded language, preceding even the most basic forms of deliberate thought. The sanguinary priests were the first to understand its pattern. They documented it carefully and privately, building over the years a picture of its triggers and its progression and the interventions that could sometimes, not always, bring a warrior back before he crossed the line that separated a condition from an atrocity. Battle was the most common trigger, the concentrated presence of blood and violence, and the specific psychic pressure of mortal combat. Exhaustion made it worse. Isolation from brothers made it worse. The presence of a chaplain or a sanguinary priest, a familiar voice that could reach through the noise of the compulsion to the rational mind beneath, sometimes helped. Sanguinius knew he had known for some time, and the knowledge sat in him with a specific weight that he carried without showing, the way he carried several of his heaviest things. The gene flaw came from him. It was his nature, refracted and amplified, and expressed differently in his sons than in himself, but traceable without difficulty back to something fundamental in who he was. He had the red thirst too, in its original form. He had spent a lifetime mastering it, incorporating it, making it part of the engine of his ability rather than a threat to his control. His sons had not had a lifetime, and some of them would not get one. He instituted protocols, specific assignments for warriors who had shown the signs, monitoring structures, pairing systems, roles designed to channel the intensity rather than suppress it entirely, because suppression, the priests had found, was less reliable than sublimation. He did not publicize the matter beyond the Legion. He was not certain this decision was correct. He weighed it against the alternative and found both options carrying costs he did not want to pay. And in the years that followed, he would come to understand that the secrecy, though understandable, had been a mistake. Not because the truth, disclosed, would have changed what was coming, but because the carrying of it alone was its own kind of damage. The visions grew darker in those years. Fragments of a war not yet arrived came to him with increasing frequency and increasing clarity. He saw brothers raising weapons against brothers. He saw cities burning that should have been in imperial hands. He saw the face of someone he loved changed in ways he could not fully process and did not want to. He told almost no one. What would he have said? "I have seen the future, and it is the end of everything we are building," he told the Emperor once, in terms careful enough to be deniable, and received an answer that did not comfort him. Then word came from Istvan, and the thing the visions had been showing him arrived. The Horus heresy is a wound in the Imperium's history, so large and so catastrophic that 10,000 years of institutional memory have not succeeded in making it feel like the past. It is still present in the fortifications of every world, in the theology of the Imperial Creed, in the architecture of every Space Marine chapter. The shadow of a betrayal so total that the Imperium has organized its entire subsequent existence around the prevention of its repetition. The betrayal began with Horus, corrupted during recovery from a wound on the moon of Davin, through the patient and specific work of those who served the Chaos Gods, and who had identified in the first among equals the weapon that could wound the Emperor most deeply. The details of that corruption are their own long story. What matters here is the shape of it as it arrived in the understanding of Sanguinius. The Blood Angels were not at Istvan III. They were not among the legions whose loyalist elements were massacred in the dropsite massacre that followed. They were elsewhere, doing the ordinary work of compliance campaigns in sectors that felt, in the aftermath of learning what had happened at Istvan, unreal. The mundane violence of a routine conquest, while the heart of the Imperium was being hollowed out by people who knew precisely where to make the incision. When the news arrived, when the confirmation came through, past the first disbelief and the second and the third, Sanguinius received it in a room alone and stayed there for a long time before he allowed himself to be seen by anyone. He had known, not the specific shape of it, not the dates and the locations and the names of who had been lost, but the shape. That much he had known. He had lived with the knowledge of it for years in the fragmented and deniable way that the visions delivered their information, and he had hoped with the specific and desperate hope of someone who knows they are hoping against evidence. He was not wrong. He had never been wrong. He gathered his sons and he spoke to them with the honesty the situation demanded, rather than the reassurance that would have been easier to offer. He told them that the road to terror would be long and that it would cost them more than they could currently estimate. He told them that some of them would not see the end of it. He told them, and this was the part that the warriors who survived it would carry with them for decades, that he was proud of them in the specific and considered way he was proud of them. Not for their capabilities, which were not in question, but for who they chose to be with those capabilities, for what they did with the strength they carried when the alternatives were available and the justifications were close at hand. The distinction mattered to him. He made sure they knew it mattered. Then he set course for terror, because that was where the war would end, and the road passed through Signus Prime. And Signus Prime was a trap. The Signus system was a gift. Horus, with the authority of command he had accumulated during the years of his ascent, had given it to Kabanda, a keeper of secrets, one of the greater servants of Slanesh, ancient enough and powerful enough to constitute, in its own right, a significant strategic asset. Kabanda had not simply occupied the system, it had prepared it. Every inhabited world, every population that might have given the Blood Angels information or support was gone. What remained was an environment saturated so thoroughly with chaos energies that the change was detectable from orbit. A wrongness in the quality of space, a heaviness in the warp signature of the system that the Legion's librarians could taste before they even began descent. The trap was built around a specific understanding of its target. Kabanda had been given information by sources within the conspiracy who had access to the Legion's most closely held secrets about the Red Thirst, about its mechanisms, its triggers, its specific relationship to the shared psychic inheritance that connected every Blood Angel to his Primarch. A trap built around raw violence would have been insufficient. What was required was something that could reach into the Blood Angel's particular vulnerability and open it from the inside. The demon released something as the Legion made planetfall, a psychic pulse precisely calibrated, propagating through the immaterium in a frequency that matched the resonance of Sanguinius's gene seed. Every Blood Angel on the surface felt it simultaneously. The Red Thirst that managed and monitored and carefully structured condition that the Legion had spent years building protocols around stopped being manageable. It became immediate and total. a hunger that overwhelmed the channels the sanguinary priests had spent careers constructing. Warriors who had maintained absolute control through decades of the worst fighting the Crusade had offered found themselves on the wrong side of the line they had always known was there. The screaming began. The discipline collapsed, and Kabanda descended into the chaos it had made, with the unhurried confidence of something that has set a trap and is watching it close. Sanguinius fought it. He came down from the sky, and he met the demon on the surface of Signus Prime in single combat. And the engagement had the quality of something that had been waiting to happen. Two beings of completely opposed natures. One, a creature of ancient chaos excess, and the other, a Primarch who had spent a lifetime learning what it cost to master oneself, and who understood the cost completely and paid it anyway. Kabanda broke his legs before the fight was over. The bones shattered in a way that would have ended a lesser warrior's ability to stand, let alone fight. Sanguinius stood on the broken legs and continued. He drove Kabanda from the field. Not destroyed, the daemon was too old and too deeply embedded in the warp for the conditions of a planetary engagement to permit true destruction. But driven out, broken for the time being, sent howling back through the immaterial veil, with the specific quality of damage that are being inflicted by something it had not expected to find as much resistance as it did. Those who watched it happen and survived to describe it would spend the rest of their lives searching for the right word for what Sanguinius had demonstrated. It was not simply courage, because courage was a thing they had all seen many times. It was refusal, a fundamental and complete unwillingness to yield even when every signal available said that yielding was the rational response. His sons, watching him fight on broken legs and still prevailing, found their way back. The psychic resonance that Kabanda had released lost its grip as the demon's presence withdrew. Not all the warriors caught in the descent could be recovered. Some were too far into the thirst, and those were grieved and laid to rest in the way the Legion grieved all its losses, which was to say completely and specifically by name. But enough came back, enough to take the system, enough to hold it and move on. Something shifted in Sanguinius at Signus Prime that did not shift back. Not his will, that was unaffected. Not his love for his sons, that was also unaffected. What changed was the resolution of the visions. The fragmentary, deniable quality that had allowed him, over the years, to hope he was misreading them. That quality was gone. What he saw now was clear. He knew what was waiting at the end of the road to terror. He knew the chamber and the figure in it and the outcome of the meeting. He set this knowledge in the deepest available part of himself and covered it with everything else. And he did not speak of it, and he continued. When Horus's fleet arrived in the Sol system and the final act of the heresy began, what remained of the Imperium's loyalist forces converged on Terra with the specific urgency of people who understand that what they are defending is the last thing there is to defend. The Imperial Palace, a city continent of walls and spires and fortifications accumulated over centuries of the Emperor's occupation, became the site of a siege whose scale and duration tested every resource available to those who held it. The siege lasted months. The numbers involved on both sides exceeded anything the Crusade had produced in terms of concentrated violence in a single theatre. Hundreds of thousands of Astartes, millions of ordinary soldiers, war machines and aircraft and orbital bombardment, and the constant psychic pressure of a warp that had been opened to a degree that made the sky above the palace burn, with colours that had no ordinary names. The walls were kilometres high and tens of kilometres thick in places, and they were taken and retaken and held and lost and held again, and every metre of them cost more than the people defending them were certain they had left to spend. Through all of it, Sanguinius was present. This is not a small thing to say. The siege was enormous, and he was one being, however extraordinary. But the particular quality of his presence, his visibility in the worst engagements, his willingness to descend personally into breaches that should have been indefensible, his voice on the Vox channels that carried the kind of certainty that has nothing to do with optimism and everything to do with will, meant that his sons fought differently when they knew he was near. Not better, exactly. They were already fighting at the limit of what was possible, but with a quality of determination that is difficult to describe accurately, and that those who felt it compared later to the experience of being reminded, in the middle of something overwhelming, why you started. Kabanda returned as Sanguinius had known it would. It came through a section of the outer wall during one of the heretic forces' heaviest assault phases, and its arrival was announced by a shockwave in the warp that every psyker in the palace felt simultaneously, and by the collapse of a section of fortification several meters thick. The Blood Angels met it again, and this time they met it with the accumulated fury of a legion that had been waiting for this specific encounter since Signus Prime. The demon was cast down again, broken again, sent back through the veil, with the kind of damage that Kabanda would carry as a reminder of what a legion fighting in genuine grief looks like when it has decided that this is the one. But the siege was not the final arena. It never had been. Everyone who understood the shape of what was happening, the Emperor, Horus, Sanguinius, the senior commanders on both sides, knew that the final resolution was not going to come through the grinding arithmetic of walls held and walls lost. It was going to come in a much smaller space. In the final hours of the siege, the Emperor made the decision to teleport aboard the Vengeful Spirit with a small force and end the war the way wars of this kind eventually have to end. Not through the consumption of everything available, but through the death of the one being whose death would cause the consuming to stop. The decision cost him something visible even to those who could not fully interpret his emotional states. He was not a being who expressed what he felt in ordinary ways. But the decision to step onto the Vengeful Spirit, to place himself in range of what Horus had become, had a quality of finality about it that those present registered in the way that people register things they will not understand until later. Sanguinius went with him. This was not a debate. There was no version of the scenario in which Sanguinius stood at the teleportation point and did not step through it. The teleportation scattered the assault group across the Vengeful Spirit. The coordinates had been set for a specific location aboard the ship, but the warp energies suffusing the flagship. Horus had opened the vessel to the immaterium in ways that made it only partially coherent as a physical space, disrupted the arrival, and deposited the assault group in fragments across different sections of a ship that had been architecturally remade by chaos into something that followed its own logic rather than any standard naval blueprint. Corridors ended without explanation. Chambers connected that should have been separated by hundreds of meters. The gravity shifted. The quality of light was wrong in ways that were difficult to specify but immediately perceptible. Sanguinius moved through it. He had been in environments shaped by chaos before. He understood its language, or at least its grammar, the way it distorted space according to emotional rather than physical principles, building environments that reflected the intentions of whoever had made them rather than the constraints of the real. The Vengeful Spirit had been made to communicate something. He understood what it was communicating. He continued anyway. He found Horus in a chamber that should not have existed. Too large, its ceiling too high, its walls carrying the faint luminescence of accumulated warp energy. The Horus who stood in that chamber was not the Horus who had embraced Sanguinius on the bridge of a Crusade flagship decades ago. He was Horus, and he was something else. The two things occupying the same space in the way that two sounds occupy the same air, each still individually distinct, but the combination producing something neither would produce alone. Horus spoke first. The accounts of what passed between them in that chamber disagree on the specific words, and this is almost certainly because the specific words were not the primary medium of communication between two beings of that magnitude with that history. There was an offer. The structure of every account agrees on that. Not mercy in any conventional sense, but a choice, a door that was presented as still being open, which it was not, but which Horus either believed was open or wanted Sanguinius to believe was open. Turn. Acknowledge that the Emperor's project had failed, not because of Horus's actions, but because of its own internal contradictions, because of what it required and what it was willing to spend to achieve those requirements. Join. Sanguinius refused. Every account agrees on this too. There was no hesitation described in any of them. He refused with a completeness that left no room for negotiation. Not because he was impulsive, he was never impulsive, but because he had made this decision long before he arrived in this chamber. He had made it on Signus Prime when the visions became clear. He had made it in every engagement since, in every choice to keep fighting when the option to stop fighting was technically available. The refusal in that chamber was not a decision. It was the declaration of a decision already made and already lived by. The fight was brief. It had to be. Sanguinius was extraordinary, the most physically gifted of the Primarchs after Ferrus Manus, armed with the spear of Telesto, guided by a prescience that had navigated him through every impossible situation the Crusade and the heresy had produced. But Horus in this incarnation was not simply Horus. He was the culmination of everything 4 Chaos gods could accomplish when they turned their combined attention toward a single being and spent years of careful investment making him into the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. The gap between them was not in quality, it was in magnitude, and Sanguinius had known this. He had seen this in the visions. He went in anyway. He went in because the Emperor needed to reach Horus, because someone needed to be there first, because a wound made in that chamber, even a wound insufficient to end the engagement, was still a wound, still something that the Emperor could use in the seconds that would follow. When the Emperor arrived and the final confrontation began, Sanguinius bought time. He bought it with the only currency he had left, and the purchase was made in full knowledge of what it cost. He fell. The chamber was quiet for a moment that those who were not there have been trying to describe adequately for 10,000 years. Then the Emperor arrived. The death of Sanguinius moved through the Blood Angels like a physical thing. Not as metaphor, not as the psychological impact of devastating news, though it was that too, but as a literal propagation through the psychic bond that exists between a Primarch and his sons, the connection written into the gene seed that ties each warrior to the father, whose blood, in the most direct biological sense, he carries. Every blood angel alive in that moment felt the death, every one of them. Those on the walls of the palace and those in the void, battles above terror and those in transit between systems who had not yet arrived to take part in the siege. The death of Sanguinius found each of them wherever they were, and it arrived as a wound. In the weeks and months that followed, as the siege ended and the heresy's final accounting began, the Blood Angels began to manifest something that had not been seen before. Warriors would be engaged in ordinary activities, training, maintenance, the slow work of aftermath and recovery. And then something would shift. A smell, sound, the quality of light in a particular moment. Some trigger that was not always identifiable, and the warrior would stop being in the present. He would be somewhere else. He would be in the chamber on the Vengeful Spirit. He would be Sanguinius, not experiencing the events as an observer, but living them from the inside, the perspective indistinguishable from the original. He would see what his Primarch had seen. He would feel what his Primarch had felt. He would fight the battle that had already been fought and lost. This was the Black Rage. The name arrived quickly because the color of it was immediately apparent. The black of grief and the black of the armor that those who fell into it were eventually given, and the black of a sky that has had all its light removed. The rage is distinct from the red thirst in a way that is important, and that the blood angels spend a great deal of their institutional effort articulating clearly. The thirst is hunger, the atavistic pull toward blood that was present in the gene seed from the beginning, the flaw that Sanguinius himself carried and had spent his life mastering. The rage is something else. It is a collapse of temporal boundaries. It is the moment when the weight of genetic memory exceeds the weight of present experience, and a warrior stops being himself because the self that he is carries too much of someone else's last moments. It is grief that has been encoded into biology and that expresses itself not as sadness. The rage is not sad, but as the absolute reality of the worst moment ever experienced by the being whose blood you carry, arriving without warning in the middle of a Tuesday. There is no cure. There has never been a cure. The sanguinary priests have searched for one across 10,000 years with a commitment and a thoroughness that itself speaks to the culture of the chapter. The same culture that would rather name its losses than merely count them. There are interventions that can delay the onset. There are practices that reduce the frequency of its occurrence in susceptible warriors. But once a warrior has fully entered the rage, he does not come back from it. The person he was is gone, replaced by a Sanguinius living his last minutes, and what remains will continue until the body it occupies is destroyed. Those who fall to the Black Rage are given the Death Company. They are armored in black. Their insignia is covered. They are given the pastoral care of a chaplain who wears black alongside them, who speaks to them in the language of Sanguinius's final hours, who offers them the death they have already experienced in their minds and that they will now experience in their bodies, in battle, at the front of the most dangerous engagement available, spending themselves completely in the place where their grief can most change the outcome. The blood angels grieve everyone. This is not performance. It is practice, maintained across 10,000 years, because Sanguinius remembered every name, and his sons have not found a reason to do otherwise. The centuries after the heresy brought the blood angels a kind of solitude that the other surviving legions did not fully share. Their losses had been extraordinary. Their gene seed was unstable in ways that added extra complexity to the process of rebuilding. The demands of the Codex Astartes, the Ultramarines' document of post-heresy reorganization, sat uneasily with a legion whose particular nature made certain of its provisions difficult to implement cleanly. And the curse, the double curse of thirst and rage, meant that the process of building toward full strength was always partially offset by the process of losing warriors to conditions that other chapters did not have to account for. They rebuilt anyway. They built successor chapters, the flesh-tearers, the angels Encarmine, the angels Sanguine, the blood drinkers, among many others, each carrying the gene seed forward in its own variation, each developing its own culture around the shared inheritance and the shared wound. The flesh tearers, in particular, became known across the Imperium for a ferocity that sometimes crossed the line the Blood Angels themselves tried to hold. A chapter whose control over the Red Thirst was more tenuous than most, whose history included incidents that the wider Imperium looked at with unease, and that the Blood Angels themselves regarded with a complicated mixture of recognition and grief. They are kin. The failure of control that the flesh tearers sometimes display is a failure the Blood Angels know intimately from the inside. It does not make them strangers. It makes them a reminder. There is a figure that appears on the battlefields where Blood Angels fight. It appears without announcement in the moments of greatest crisis, when the line is breaking, when the death company has spent itself, and the ordinary warriors that remain are being asked to do something they cannot quite do. When the mathematics of the engagement have turned against the sons of Sanguinius in ways that feel final. It wears golden armor. It has wings. It carries a power that exceeds the extraordinary and moves through enemy forces with the specific quality of motion that observers consistently and independently describe using the same vocabulary, like watching something that cannot be stopped by anything that exists. The Sanguinor departs when the crisis passes. It does not speak. It does not accept acknowledgement or interact with the warriors. It fights alongside in any way that would allow for normal communication. It is simply present, and then it is not, and the engagement has been turned by whatever it did while it was there. No explanation has achieved consensus. The most common understanding within the chapter is that it is a fragment of Sanguinius himself, something that persisted in the warp when the Primarch died, sustained by the accumulated psychic weight of the love that 10,000 years of sons have directed toward the memory of their father, returning when that love requires something more than memory. Others believe it is a specific warrior, a brother Azkaelon of the Ancient Legion who stood closest to Sanguinius in his final years, and who undertook some transformation in the aftermath of the heresy that bound him to this role. Others believe both explanations are inadequate, and that the honest position is that they do not know, and that not knowing should not prevent appropriate gratitude. What every warrior who has fought beside it agrees on is the quality of its attention. It looks at the warriors near it in the moments between actions, with an attention that survivors describe in terms that are consistent enough to be worth noting. It looks at them the way someone looks at you when they are genuinely glad that you are alive. Commander Dante has led the Blood Angels for 1,500 years. This is the kind of statement that passes too quickly if one does not pause to let it settle. 1,500 years of uninterrupted command. 1,500 years of decision, loss, recovery, campaign, grief, renewal. The Imperium has changed around him multiple times over. Primarchs he knew by reputation have returned from circumstances that should have been permanent. The shape of the galaxy itself has altered. Dante has watched all of it from the command throne of a chapter that carries its wounds openly, and he has carried his own wounds with a dignity that those who have served under him consistently describe in the same terms. The dignity of someone who has decided that the accumulating weight of what has been lost will not be permitted to become the heaviest thing about him. He has come close. The defense of Baal against Hive Fleet Leviathan brought him as close as he has publicly come to the edge of what he could carry. The Tyranid fleet that turned toward the Baal system was not a local incursion. It was a migration, a river of biomass and hunger moving through the galaxy with the patient, mindless purpose of an ecosystem consuming everything in its path. The outlying worlds of the system were absorbed first, then the moons. Baal Secundus was stripped, its surface scoured of every biological trace, its atmosphere thinned to near nothing, the landscape that had shaped the myths of Sanguinius's origin reduced to bare rock under a changed sky. Baal itself was next. Dante led the defense with what he had, and what he had was not enough by any honest accounting. He called in every favor, every allied force, every debt owed to the Blood Angels across a century of campaigning, and he built a defense that was coherent and carefully considered, and still vastly insufficient for the scale of what was coming. He placed Death Company Marines at the outer perimeter, warriors already in the grip of the rage, spending themselves on the advanced tendrils of the fleet in the way that only those who have already accepted the end can spend themselves. He held the inner fortifications with veterans who had seen things that should have broken them and had not, and who held the walls not because they believed they could hold them forever, but because holding them one more hour, one more day, was still worth doing. The Great Rift saved them. The cataclysmic tearing of the galaxy by the psychic energies of the Chaos Gods, the event called the Cicatrix Maledictum, propagated through the warp in the middle of the siege, disrupting the synaptic web that gave the Hive fleet its coordination. Without the web, the Tyranids consumed each other. The hunger that had been directed outward turned inward in the absence of guidance, and the fleet tore itself apart in the biological equivalent of a system crash. Dante stood on the walls of Baal and watched the enemy consume itself in the dawn of a galaxy that had been permanently changed, and felt something that was not quite victory and was not quite grief, and was perhaps something between them for which there is no precise word. Then Robert Guillemot returned, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, raised from his near-death stasis through mechanisms that the Imperium is still processing, and looked at what Dante had done and what Dante was still doing, and made a decision that carried the weight of genuine recognition. He named Dante the Lord Regent of Imperium Nihilus, the commander of the half of the Imperium that now lay beyond the Great Rift, cut off from Terra, operating without reliable communication with the seat of imperial power. Not a ceremonial role, the most consequential military appointment available in the changed galaxy. Dante accepted it the way he accepts everything, without ceremony, without the inflation of his own importance, with the specific and practiced focus of someone who has long since worked out that the question is never whether you are adequate to a burden, but whether the burden needs carrying. The Blood Angels are a diminishing chapter by the actuarial logic that the Red Thirst and the Black Rage impose on their numbers. Each generation produced is not quite sufficient across the long run to fully replace what is lost. To the battlefield, yes, but also to the gene flaws, which do not care about operational tempo and do not pause for rebuilding periods. The apothecaries of the chapter hunt the gene seed of fallen warriors in conditions that would excuse any other chapter from the attempt, because every recovered gene seed is another generation, another son, another chance. The sanguinary priests carry this burden specifically and deliberately. They are warriors and physicians and theologians simultaneously, the only combination in the Imperium that holds all three functions in a single office, because the Blood Angels understood early that the management of the gene flaws could not be separated from the spiritual care of those who carried them, and neither could be separated from the ability to fight alongside those you were caring for. They carry chalices that hold blood maintained in an unbroken ceremonial line from the Primarch himself. The blood of Sanguinius, symbolically preserved across 10,000 years, offered to warriors in rituals whose precise meaning has been debated for centuries and whose practical effect has never been in serious doubt. The ritual matters. The connection it represents matters. The act of drinking from the same line as the Father who gave you everything, including the wound, this matters. They paint, they sculpt, they sing, and not only in the formal liturgical sense. They compose in the hours between campaigns. They decorate the walls of the fortress monastery with art that has been accumulating for 10,000 years into something that no longer merely decorates but actively tells the history of the chapter in a medium that words alone could not carry. A new warrior who walks those halls for the first time and spends a day moving slowly through what has been put on those walls will understand something about who he is and who he comes from that no amount of verbal briefing could produce. This is not incidental to the warrior identity of the Blood Angels. It is not a hobby maintained for morale. It is the direct inheritance of Sanguinius himself, who understood that violence without beauty as its counterweight produces beings who are capable only of more violence, and that the specific tragedy of the Space Marine, the sacrifice of ordinary humanity that the transformation demands, required a compensating investment in the things that make humanity worth preserving. He was right. The Blood Angels have survived 10,000 years of the worst the galaxy could offer, with their humanity more or less intact. The art is part of why. The remembering of names is part of why. The grief that is permitted to be grief rather than suppressed into something harder and more dangerous is part of why. A Blood Angel warrior may fall to the red thirst in one engagement and spend the recovery period composing music that would move a civilian listener to tears. The two things are not in contradiction. They are both expressions of the same inheritance, the inheritance of a being who was capable of extraordinary violence and extraordinary beauty in equal measure, and who made it clear by example that both were serious obligations and that neither could be dismissed without diminishing the other. Baal still stands. The twin moons still arc overhead, scarred further now than they were when Sanguinius walked beneath them, but enduring in the way of things that have already survived their worst. The salt flats are still pale. The light still has that quality of late afternoon, as though the end of something is always approaching without quite arriving. The fortress monastery of the Blood Angels rises over the terrain of a world that has given more to the Imperium than most worlds are ever asked to give, and the warriors who train in its yards are the sons of sons of sons of men who stood in those same yards 10,000 years ago and were told by someone they loved completely that they were worth being proud of. Sanguinius is dead. This is a fact. His body was not recovered from the Vengeful Spirit. There is no tomb. There is no relic in the physical sense that can be pointed to as the resting place of the Great Angel. What remains is everything he put into the world. The gene seed, the culture, the art on the walls, the sanguinary priests and their chalices, the Death Company chaplains in their black armor, the Sanguinor appearing without explanation in the worst moments and departing without taking credit. He is absent and he is present. He is not worshipped in the way that Lorgar wanted to worship him, because that was never what he wanted from his sons. He is remembered specifically by name, with the full weight of what he actually was, rather than a simplified version that would be easier to carry. He was a being of extraordinary virtue and genuine wound, capable of beauty and capable of the specific violence of the thirst, capable of prescience and incapable of using that prescience to protect himself from what it showed him. He was not perfect. He was something more interesting than perfect. He was someone who looked at the full scope of what he was, including the parts he had not chosen and would not have chosen, and decided to be responsible for all of it anyway. The curse is not a punishment. The Blood Angels have worked out over 10 millennia that the black rage is grief, that the red thirst is hunger for life in a universe that extinguishes it with remarkable efficiency. Both of these are human things in the deepest sense, encoded into beings who are not human in almost any other respect, but human in this, which is perhaps the most important respect of all. The sons of Sanguinius carry their father's last moments in their blood, not because the universe is cruel, though the universe is frequently cruel, but because he loved them enough and they loved him enough that the connection between them survived his death and will continue surviving it for as long as there are blood angels left to carry it. They fight on. Dante watches the dawn arrive over Baal with the specific attention of someone who has seen many dawns and has not stopped finding them worth seeing. The Death Company spends itself in the place where its grief can do the most good. The Sanguinor appears when the sons of the great angel need it most, looks at them with the attention of someone glad that they are alive, and departs. Somewhere in the halls of the fortress monastery, a young warrior is learning to paint. He does not know yet whether he will fall to the rage, or resist the thirst, or serve 50 years and die in a trench on a world whose name he will not remember. He does not need to know. He is learning to paint because this is what the sons of Sanguinius do. They make something beautiful in a universe that does not make it easy, because that is what their father did, and because they understand, in the way that heirs understand the most important things left to them, that this is the inheritance worth keeping. And so we set this story down, carefully, the way one sets down something heavy and precious, not dropped, not placed carelessly, but returned to its resting place with the attention it deserves. You have moved through 10,000 years of it tonight. The salt flats and the red moons and the child with white wings, the legion of angels who painted between battles, the trap at Signus Prime and the broken legs that fought on, the walls of terror and the quiet chamber and the moment that cracked history in two, the grief that became a gene, the sons who chose, generation after generation, to carry the whole of their inheritance, the beauty alongside the wound, because their father had done the same. Let all of it settle now. The way water settles in a still place, gradually, without effort, the sediment finding its level on its own, if you give it time and do not disturb it. Wherever you are, in a room that holds darkness quietly, in a house that holds other people's breathing, under a sky that is doing what skies do while you are inside, you are still. You have been still or close to still for some time now. The story has been doing the work. You only had to receive it. The angel is at rest. The sons carry what they carry. The dawn will come to Baal when it comes. Let yourself be quiet now. The tide is slow. The light is low. Whatever tomorrow requires, it does not require you yet. Sleep well.